Taghi, you worked for 10 years on the film. Walter, did you come in at a certain point and talk about shaping the film?
Yeah, I came in 5 years ago.
And what about, how did you decide the order of how everything was going to flow, all the information?
Well, we didn't decide that. We had no sense of the structure of the film. We knew we had one purpose: tell the story in a way that's never been told before, using stuff that hasn't been seen and people who've never been filmed or have been on camera, and just go into detail, and also include as many Iranian voices as possible, because this story has been told in television documentaries before, and although there have been 1 or 2 Iranian faces, not many. So I'm Iranian by birth, but I live in England, so I kind of bridge that Anglo-Iranian cultural gap. So we started with that notion: tell the story in as much depth as possible. But the stuff that we found kept changing our perspective in how it could be told, and it kept shifting the ground under our feet. As you see, everything that you see in the film is happening as it's happening, and so we were kind of directed by the archive research and discoveries that changed the way we told the story.
There's a couple of devices that you use. One of them is animation. Another one is, it's like you put a box in front of the lens and you're looking through this square within a square. What were the inspirations for those 2 techniques?
Walter? Well, the animation came about because this coup happened in 1953. It didn't happen in the last year. If that were the case, we would have thousands of hours of smartphone footage of everything, 24 hours a day. But in 1953, that wasn't the case. There were very few cameras around that could shoot at night, which is when this coup, actually the crunch of all this happened. And even during the day, there were just a few newsreel cameras, so the events of the coup itself were not covered, except in a very fragmentary way. So, but we have the testimony of people like Mossadegh's bodyguard. This is what happened. So do we stay on that person and simply let his face and his words tell the story? Yes, that's a way to do it. But we were more interested in some visual way of doing that. And it was Taghi's brother, actually, who was also a filmmaker, who had seen some, what you might call oil painting animation. And he said, you ought to take a look at this. And one thing led to another, and we found ultimately Martin Pick, the man who drew the animation itself. It's kind of rotoscope technique, but it gets us out of the trap of recreating the events where the audience thinks, is this really the way it looked? But by doing the oil painting technique, it smears it to the extent that it's kind of like if you could tap into somebody's brain, this is sort of what you might see. So it's not the events, but it does give a visual, visceral representation of the events as memory.
And what about that box? It's like you're shooting through a box. There's a couple of talking heads.
I think you're talking about what we've come to call the phantom flashbacks.
Okay.
I know what you mean. It's a kind of a slightly zoomed in box. It's got a blurred edge, and the audio changes. It has a slightly echoey feel. That's Walter's idea. He can expect. Those are the cleverest things I've seen a film editor do in a film. You're flashing back to something that hasn't been in the film, but the audience think, I think I've seen that. But Walter can explain.
Right. Well, it's also, we use it a couple of times as something that the audience has seen, and we reprise it. But it's also a way of, it's the cinematic equivalent of an asterisk, and then you read something at the bottom of a page that gives you a little more depth, but it's not part of the text. although it's on the page. This is on the film, but that treatment kind of says, this is a little background material that you may have forgotten about or that you need to know in order to know what this person is talking about. So that emerged out of the other aspect, which is that much of the archive material was shot to television back when, and that is the 4:3 aspect ratio. And so the tendency is to either put that in the center with black edges or to blow it up and crop the top and bottom. And rather than do that, what I did was take the 4:3 and push it to one side or the other, and which gave me a sizable black area here where we could put text in it. And that led to the ability to use these to create a sense of dialogue between two pieces of archive. So somebody is over here looking in this direction saying something, and we cut, and now there's somebody on this side of the frame looking this way saying something perhaps different. And so they're, in a sense, it's as if they're in the same room, which is the total frame, having a dialogue with each other. And this really comes into fruition when we have a dialogue between Stephen Mead and Norman Derbyshire, who were both assigned by the CIA and the MI6 to convince the Shah's sister to do this dangerous thing, which is take herself and the message to Tehran and convince her brother to go along with this coup. But there are several other, in fact, many other instances of that kind of dialogue. And then sometimes we would just take the old archive and blow it up full frame for emphasis. So the film plays with, because there are many different formats, videotape, Super 8, 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter. The film plays with these different formats in a creative way.
The BBC show End of Empire.
Granada,
okay,
not BBC.
No.
Many people make this mistake. So
I will not
it's not the
make that
BBC.
mistake.
It's what became ITV.
So this was a commercial network in the 80s, well, the 70s and 80s, called Granada Television. There's BBC, which is I was going to say the state-run, which is the national broadcaster, the British Broadcasting Corporation. That's the BBC. And then there are lots of commercial stations which were regional in the UK. Every region had its own. Granada was a Northern England network. That's merged and it's become ITV. And so in a lot of people's minds, and it's totally understandable when you say the British television documentary, they connected, oh, it's British television, it's a BBC. And so that typo has showed up in a bunch of reviews, even in the Financial Times 2 days ago. But the network is Granada Television.
To clarify, who exactly got you all the transcripts and the 36 cans of film and the 520 minutes of interviews?
Right. So that had different sources. The initial trigger for finding the cans of film, for realizing they actually are kept, they've been preserved at the British Film Institute, was going to interview Mossadegh's grandson in Paris, who, of course, I wanted to talk to him because he's an inner circle, he's a blood relative. That was important to have his testimony, and he's very old, and we wanted to get him. But then also discovering during the interview that he tells me that back in the 80s, he was an advisor to a Granada television documentary called End of Empire, the Iran episode about the coup. Even though Iran was never a colony, it was included in End of Empire because they treated it like a colony. It was a colony in anything but name. And so he told me he was an advisor on this program, and when the program finished, the team wanted to throw away their papers, and rather than throw it away, they gave it to him because they thought, well, he's an advisor, this is his country story, he should keep them. And he kept them in his basement for like 34 years. And when he told me that he's got them, I said, oh, I'd love to see them, please. And then that's how we got those papers. The transcripts, some of the transcripts were in there, including the significant Derbyshire transcript. And that led me to think, well, maybe there might be footage. And then I heard that actually when Granada finished this landmark, huge documentary series, they had a lot of outtakes, they had original footage, they had reassembled everything they had in use, and they'd given it to the British Film Institute to preserve. They did a lot of restoration and preservation of old footage, and they kept it until we showed up, and we got those cans, and we had to pay for it. The negotiations took a long time. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of money was involved, haggling happened, and finally they gave us access to digitize all of that, and so they also had some of the transcripts that went with those. So the transcripts came from the BFI and Mossadegh's grandson, and the footage came from the BFI.
At one point, one of the people you interviewed makes the point that this is just another nail in the Official Secrets Act. And Ralph Fiennes actually appeared in a film called Official Secrets, which was quite good last year. So I assume it was pretty easy to get him on board?
Yes, it's Lord David Owen, who was the Foreign Secretary, the equivalent of, is it the Secretary of State? Who's the equivalent in America when the Foreign Secretary?
Yeah, Secretary of State.
Secretary of State. He was the Foreign Secretary in the UK during the Iranian Revolution, and he believes that that there is no reason to keep this a secret anymore. Britain should come clean, and he thinks this sort of thing should be the final nail in the coffin of the Official Secrets Act. And the Official Secrets connection is great because Rafe is the lawyer in that movie, but the connection for Rafe for this film goes back further. It actually goes to Walter Murch and their work on English Patients, so he can explain how that came about.
I met Rafe on English Patient, and we kept up a dialogue over the years. He asked me my opinion on some scripts that he was developing. He asked me to edit a couple of the films that he directed, and unfortunately I was never available. I was doing something else, including this film. And in fact, he had phoned me a month or so in 2018 about editing his Nerea film, which came out.
Right.
And so I was thinking about him, and then we had this transcript. Obviously, we had not been able to find the original film from which this transcript was taken, because that can of film was not at the BFI. Everything else was, but not this one. And so how do we represent this? How do we visualize it? And we were intending to get an actor to read the lines, and then, well, as we record it, why don't we photograph it in a recording studio? Okay, fine. But then I thought, well, let's get Rafe to do it. And then Taghi immediately thought, yes, and let's recreate in the Savoy Hotel the conditions under which presumably this original interview took place. And we phoned Rafe up and pitched this idea to him. He was intrigued for very much the reasons that you just said. And we went over and showed him material from the film. It immediately struck a chord with him. And the only thing that made him a little anxious is he said he had a big beard on because he was playing Anthony and Cleopatra at the time. And he said, I can't shave this beard. I can't become Norman. And we said, no, we wouldn't want that even if we could. We just want you to kind of be his avatar. You're the channel through which Norman Derbyshire's words will become flesh again. And he said, okay, I got it. And then after that, it was simply a question of working out the schedule of, his very busy schedule. And he eventually gave us, 3 hours one afternoon in October of 2018.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant part of the movie, and quite frankly, when he pops up, it changes the whole dynamic of the documentary. You're already watching a compelling documentary, a world-class, award-winning, and then all of a sudden, you do this kind of switcheroony, and you've got a name actor actually playing one of the people, and I just think that it's just a brilliant transition. Now, the second time I watched the film, I noticed he pops up about the 8-minute mark, but there's somebody standing in front of his face, so you don't really see him, but it's like you're teasing the audience.
That's it.
Got it.
That's a little editorial trick that we came on late. We had previewed the film in the States and in Canada in April of 2019, and it was longer than by about, I don't know, 14 minutes. And so in this crunch recut, one of the things, one of the ideas was exactly, you're the first person to pick that up, actually. And it was to just add a little dash of, there's a secret, there's something that will be revealed here, this mysterious person whom we are not showing you right now will emerge. So thank you very much for seeing that.
No.
Yeah.
In the scenes shot in the Savoy Hotel, obviously that room is probably a high dollar room. Is that the Waterloo Bridge that's in the background?
That is the Waterloo Bridge. Well spotted. That's the bridge that crosses from the Savoy on the Strand on the north side to the south, which is the South Bank Centre, the National Film Theatre, and the National Theatre, and the huge Royal Festival Hall Arts Complex. So that's.
I think the one that you can see is not the Waterloo Bridge. It's the Hungerford Bridge.
Well, it depends.
Waterloo is over on the left.
The Waterloo is on the left. Yeah. Okay. So you're right. The Waterloo will be over the right shoulder of Rafe, which is probably behind the window frame. You can't see it. Looking that way, where now the London Eye is, that's the Hungerford Bridge.
Okay, because there's so many bridges on the Thames, right? I mean, you know. Where did
It's actually, it's ironic that very view is the same view that they have behind the Andrew Marr Show, which is the preeminent Sunday morning political talk show. So the same Hungerford Bridge with the London Eye and, you know, all of that stuff. So.
Where did that Nixon clip come from, where he's basically admitting to the whole thing?
That's actually an American archive. It was one of those kind of.
It's the Nixon Museum archive.
Yeah, it's one of those kind of end of career legacy interviews, and it was in an archive, and we found it, and it's a very.
It's from the Nixon Library.
Yeah. Very straightforward admission that we did a coup. We did a coup with Britain.
No,
especially Fred coming from somebody like Nixon, who was the vice president to Eisenhower at the time of the coup.
Somebody makes a comment in the film, and it's a phrase, and I mean, I understand what it means, but yet it's still, it doesn't confuse me, but it just provokes this sense of wonderment, like, why would you say that? And they go, not pillar to post. I've never heard anybody say that, but it's a great saying.
That's a very British phrase, and that's Norman Derbyshire. Ray finds Norman Derbyshire is how he describes the Shah as in an unstable, kind of lacking in confidence person who can be knocked about with his opinion and decisions depending on who talks to him, who was last in the room. He kind of listens to the last person, and then so he swings from this decision to that decision. So that's being knocked from pillar to post is a very English phrase. I thought you were going to pick up on diborto.
I actually wrote that down. Is that an actual word, or is that just a slang for abortion?
No,
you heard it here first. I mean, kudos to you for picking up on these things. That clip is something that was an outtake from a newsreel at the time. So this is the first time anyone has ever seen it in public. It was never part of, Pathé News because whatever. And we kind of wonder where it comes from. We think that it's an in-joke among this man and his friends from something that probably an Indian worker who worked at Abadan at the refinery, which was another sore point, by the way, with the Iranians, that the British would bring in Indians to do work that the Iranians could have done perfectly well. But anyway, that the Indian must have, we're supposing that he said, it's a debacle. And instead, the Indian accent, it came out, it's a debacle. And so this became a catchphrase with this person. Mr. Hazard is his name, among him and his friends. So he was kind of saying it as an in-joke, thinking that someday it'll be in a newsreel and he'll become famous among his friends. But, you know.
This documentary certainly puts into perspective all the events as they happened. I mean, I was only superficially aware of the 1953 coup. I had no idea that there had been an attempt and that the Shah had fled to Rome and then had come back, and the second attempt was successful in overthrowing the prime minister.
Yeah, yes. I mean, not only just those little intricate details of what happened, who left, who came back, and how it all unfolded. For a lot of people, the actual existence of the coup as a pivotal event doesn't feature on their radar, or that they don't know about. So, yeah.
The other thing, which is very significant as far as Derbyshire is concerned, is that after the failure of the first coup, the CIA said, pull the plug, get out, to Kermit Roosevelt and everybody. And Kermit got cold feet, not what he says in his book. He paints himself up as a hero, but here the CIA was saying, it's over, you know, clear out, otherwise we're going to be in big trouble. And instead, Derbyshire, by radio from Cyprus, phones his contacts in Tehran, the Rashidian brothers, and says, bring the gang out on the street and create chaos, which they do. And that turned the tide. Significantly, Derbyshire did not ask for permission from the Foreign Office in London or from the CIA. He you know, took the bull by the horn and did this himself on his own bat. And that turned the tide. And now Kermit Roosevelt was, you know, back in charge again. But he was never really in charge. Roosevelt, as this emerged, was kind of a bagman who came. He was only in Iran for about 3 weeks. He brought lots of money, but he didn't speak Farsi, he didn't speak Persian, and the whole architecture of the coup was something that Derbyshire himself had written out, and that was the backbone of Operation Ajax, was Derbyshire's plan for how to pull this thing off. And so all of these were things that came out of that interview with Derbyshire.
And as it's made clear, the British had much more experience in espionage at that point than the Americans, because I don't think before the CIA there was the OSS, but were they really operational in the early part of the 20th century like the British were?
No. I mean, thanks to the Madison Doctrine, the United States has fooled around a lot with governments in the Americas, but they'd never done anything in the Eastern Hemisphere. And one of the things I learned on working on this film is that Truman created the CIA as a clearinghouse to do scholarly analysis of reports from the spy agencies of the various armed forces, which they had trouble with, he and Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, during the war. But it was definitely a scholarly organization. When the Dulles brothers came in with Eisenhower in '52, they had been part of the OSS, and they saw the CIA as a perfect vehicle to weaponize it and turn it back into a version of the OSS. And first thing out of the gate was the coup against Iran. And not in the film, except very tangentially, the Dulles brothers, as lawyers, had been screwed over, they felt, by Mossadegh, who deep-sixed one of their big plans to do a complete reinvention of the whole infrastructure of Iran in the late 1940s. So they already had their gun sights out for Mossadegh for personal reasons, nothing to do with politics.
And just
so sorry to cut in here. One sec. We have about 5 minutes.
I'll close it out with this statement. I noticed there's a clip of the Shah close to the time that he was deposed, talking about colonialism, and it seems that he himself was aware that his reign was on borrowed time.
Yeah, I think the Shah went throughout his post-coup reign, right after the revolution, peddling this idea that the coup wasn't a coup, it was a national uprising in support of his rule as king, as the absolute king. But he obviously knew how it unfolded, and so in fact it's very telling that in that clip, you know, in the final days almost, you can almost probably hear the protest out on the streets from his palace at the time that interview. He says, well, in the old days, you and the British and the Americans could change prime ministers just like as you wished, but we won't let you. But that kind of confidence in kind of self-governance and sovereignty and independence and not being toyed around has come a bit too late at that stage. And I'm sure he loved Iran and he really cared for his country. And but you know, that kind of don't meddle with me, don't treat me like a puppet, I want to do my own thing, came a bit late in the day. But there he is. I mean, when I saw that footage, it was like, there's a lot of debate. Was this a coup? Was this a national uprising? How effective or involved were the CIA and MI6? Was it just the Iranians doing it for themselves? Well, there's the smoking gun. The king who replaced, you know, who took power in the coup, absolute power in the coup, says, you guys change prime ministers. And so, yeah, that's his kind of defiant act in the final days.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Best of success with this film.
Thank you very much.
Great. Very good questions. Thank you.
Excellent questions. We love it when people spot tiny details that we love making.
It was my pleasure. I'm sure I'm going to see this film at least